Welcome, folks, to Inside the Leader's Mind, where what's in the way becomes the way. I'm your host, David Susan. I am so excited to have my guest here today, Julie Peck. She's the CEO of Talent Neuron. She's a transformative tech leader who fuses deep technical and business acumen with a clear, future-oriented vision to help enterprises turn AI, data, and organizational insight into meaningful competitive advantage. She leads with authenticity, empathy, and conviction, an uncommon leadership philosophy that inspires top talent to follow her into uncharted territory with confidence, alignment, and a shared commitment to winning. I love that. Under her guidance, Talent Neuron is rapidly emerging as the definitive intelligence platforms for strategic workforce planning, propelled by Julie's belief that organizations thrive when they harness advanced technology, anchor in humanity, and intentionally design their future talent and empower people to do the best work of their careers. Julie, welcome to the podcast.
David, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for asking me on. I appreciate it.
Absolutely my pleasure. When I learned about Talent Neuron, I'm like, I am so excited to talk to you about this. But for people who don't know Talent Neuron, what's the simplest way to explain what your company actually does?
So, Talent Neuron helps organizations of really all sizes, but the bigger the organization, the more likely they are to need someone like us. So we help some of the biggest companies in the world. 60% of the Fortune 100 and a lot of the global 3,000 companies. Big companies have really big challenges trying to figure out how to maneuver through the workforce challenges of today, including, where am I going to find the right talent with the right skills and the right capabilities to fill the roles I have today? And even more so as we get into strategic workforce planning, how do I make sure I have the workforce I'm going to need with the right roles, the right jobs, the right skills, the right org structure, the right job designs, et cetera, for what's going to be happening in the future. And uh, now is a very exciting, very dynamic time because there's a lot of forces pushing on companies. Today, there's geopolitical forces, there's economic forces, there's supply chain forces that are still in play. There's a bunch of things going on, even global climate change forces that are pushing on companies to rethink how they deploy not only their workforce, but even more importantly, how do they even design the work so that it can get done faster and better and more effectively and more efficiently in the future? Competing is getting harder. And so strategic workforce planning is really fed by our kind of biggest data set in the world around the global labor market. We know supply of labor. We know demand for labor. Who's hiring what? We know we have competitive intelligence. We know what comp looks like. We know what employers are offering employees. We know what the diversity makeup of any different labor pool looks like. Um, so there's a lot of information that we can tell you about not only the skills that are out there, where they are, how much they're going to cost, who you're competing against, et cetera. But also we now can bump it up against what you have today in your organization, saying, actually, you have a pool of talent over here that that would be great to upskill for these jobs of the future. You don't have to just go out to the external market and hire everything new. In fact, more and more employers aren't able to do that because the workforce is shrinking, the boomers are retiring. Everybody has become very clear that you can no longer hire your way out of every challenge that you face. And so strategic workforce planning is about putting your business drivers in, your internal talent data, skills, capabilities, roles, whatever, and external labor data all together and saying, here's what I have, here's what I need, here's what I'm going to need, and here's the gaps, and here are all the ways that I can possibly fill those gaps. And let me model some scenarios. So I can buy some of it, I can borrow some of it, I can build some of it, I can automate some of it, which is one of the more interesting frontiers these days. I want to retain these people, I want to offboard these people, and then I want to do some job and organizational redesign. So it's about putting together a work architecture for the future. How is work going to get done? It's not just about how many headcount do I need, and that's the shift that the companies of the world are having to go through. Is they've been doing headcount planning on a spreadsheet for a long time, and now it's a much deeper conversation about, well, how are we even going to structure the work so that AI can be doing some of it, people with AI can be doing some of it, and total just people can be doing some of it. And then what kind of people, where, what are we automating? It's not going to be an entire job. It's likely going to be parts of jobs. And how do we deal with that? And how do we structure it? So it's complicated. And right now the world is trying to do that with spreadsheets, which is super fun, but very impossible. Spreadsheets are two-dimensional. They have an up and down and a right to left. And even if you're doing it with a cube, there are too many dimensions. So you need a platform. And Talent Neuron really is the only company in the world that has such a platform that's actually being used in the world by the biggest companies in the world to future-proof their workforce.
So there's a lot as you're talking. I'm thinking about all the thousands of companies I've met and professionals and companies that say, "Oh, we do workforce planning." One of the things you mentioned is the largest data set.
Yes.
I'd love to hear just a little bit about that without going into the weeds too much, but then also really what your real differentiator is. And maybe that is it.
Well, I think well, let me say that the data set, Talent Neuron's history is in external labor market data, telling employers what's going on in the world outside of them. And so we've been doing that for 20 years. Well, 24 years, because actually we started this back a long time ago in about 1999. And so we have now something like 33 terabytes of data. We harvest 1.5 billion data points a day
Oh my gosh.
from 145 countries, and put it into the system. We have over 100 machine learning and AI models that take the data we pull in and create new data points because it's a combination of multiple things. So things like, what is the hiring difficulty index? Well, that's a combination of a lot of things, like how long are things open, how much competition is there. So we have a lot of derived data points, not just the ones that we harvest and pull in. So that is a massive asset. The fact that we've been doing it for as long as we have means we have 20 years of active, data to work with, which means we have an advantage that a lot of the competitors out there for other data who started in 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, they can't have more than 4 or 5 years of data. When you have 20 years of data, you have enough
Yeah.
longitudinality to be able to predict.
Yeah.
Like, you can't predict anything based on the last 5 years of data because it was the COVID craziness. So whatever you saw in the last 5 years is not indicative of what
Right.
happened before or what's gonna happen after. You can't model any of the future. We actually saw what was going on before that, what went on during the COVID period, what went on during the bounce back of COVID, and then what's been happening since. And so our data can tell us what was a trend that was happening before COVID ever happened, which things got accelerated by COVID, but still persist now, which things were truly a blip, etc. So that longitudinal data helps us give a lot more foresight into the future, and that's what companies are looking for now. They're not looking for what does the world look like today because I got a role to fill over here. They're looking for the ability to see around the corner and say, well, what am I going to need and where am I going to find it and all that. So that data set is a huge kind of magic potion behind the scenes that we have that no one else has. The competitive advantage, though, I think, is really the fact that we can pull together a organization's internal data and their external data and normalize it so you're talking apples to apples in job types, in roles, in task sets, in skills, and all of that stuff, and we can start to now show you apples to apples, like, what do you have and how does it compare to outside in the universe? you may have a more upscaled, a more upskilled employee base than some of your competitors. And that's a competitive advantage. If you double down on that, you may not even know it because you're only, up until now, you can only compare yourself to yourself. You could say, well, this is how we were doing 2 years ago and 3 years ago, but you can't, you didn't really have the ability to say, here's how we're doing relative to our competitors. And I mean your market competitors, product, business, but also your competitors for talent. Who are you actually competing with? And it's not necessarily the people that make the same products as you. We're seeing increasingly after the advent of remote work and people kind of moved all over the place. Now we're seeing customers, companies competing with literally everyone in the world for data. So that's really fascinating and
For
hairy
talent.
problem. Yeah. So
Yeah.
the data set is a magical tool, but the combination being able to bring in the client's data, their business models, their business plans, and actually give them a context to say, here's the outside world, here's your inside world, here's your business plans, here's what your gaps are going to be, here's how you can solve them, and here's what it's going to cost you for scenario A, scenario B, etc. And that's become the most magical part of it, is that marriage between internal and external talent intelligence.
What's cool is that I see there in what I heard there is it's not just subjective planning, which some people do. It is based on data. It's based on trends.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so one of the things that interests me is when we chatted briefly earlier, and you said you're wanting to do more speaking out on this publicly.
Mhm.
What what is it that made you what is the moment that made you say, I need to be the one out there, the face of the company or the thought leader and sharing?
Yeah, well, because when you move from, labor market intelligence, which typically has an HR buyer, very heavily in talent acquisition and in people analytics, talent intelligence and that kind of thing, groups. And when you move from that, which is our history, to strategic workforce planning, suddenly you're talking to the CFO, you're talking to the CIO, you're talking to the CEO. You're sometimes big companies have a chief transformation officer and all that. And so HR is still an integral part of that equation, but the dialogue now is directly in a lot of the power seats at the boardroom table. That I think I have a way of thinking about the world that is more like a CEO and a CFO than a CHRO or whatever. And so I think we have a lot of people in my company who know everything there is to know about what CHROs are tasked with and the pressures they're under right now and how things have evolved for them and their organizations. But I just think I'm in a unique position to put things in terms that like a CFO would pay attention to. Um, because it's really the CFO and the CEO that are making major promises to their shareholders about what they're going to do with margins, what they're going to do with competitive edge, what they're going to do with automation and AI. They're making promises, and there's lots of studies out there that show that the C-suites that are talking to their shareholders and their boards are saying one thing and actually feel fairly confident that it's going to happen. I saw a survey recently. It's something like 65% of, CEOs feel confident that their business is on the right track to pull in AI where they need to and start automating and doing work differently. But when you go down and survey the rank and file, and like the middle management down of those same companies, only 15% of those people say we're on the right track and we're going to be able to get there. So there's this big disconnect between the promises being made, the expectations that we have, and just the ability for an entire population of employees of all levels to figure out how to get that work done, because it's really messy in the details. It's great on a PowerPoint slide, but it's really messy in the details. And then being able to measure whether you're actually getting it done or not has up until now been extremely impossible.
So as you look at beliefs that other CEOs have about the future of work, and
Yeah.
maybe this is what you basically were talking about, what does your data show that their belief simply is not true?
Well, I think they have a general good sense that the workforce of tomorrow is gonna be substantially different than it is today. Like, you talk to a CEO, they'll go, "Yes, the workforce of tomorrow is gonna be substantially different because."
I could have predicted that pretty
Well, I
easily
mean,
too.
so I don't think there's a lot of CEOs of what I would consider to be about to be successful companies who are saying, "Nope, it's gonna be exactly the same." I think it gets a little fuzzier when they try and describe how it's gonna be different, other than, to say things like, "We're gonna be using a lot more AI." Some of the more tech savvy CEOs and CFOs are saying, "Because we're introducing agents and agentic AI, and that's what we're gonna do." But they're too far away from it to be able to know, actually, how do you do that? Who's going to build those agents? Are you actually going to bring in third party solutions that already have built agents to do certain jobs? Or are you going to try and like bring in raw LLMs and do it yourself? And if so, who's going to do that? Is it your traditional engineering team? Do they know how to build agents? And how do you decide what those agents are supposed to do? Like, agents are AI driven bots, let's call it, that are given an assignment to do a specific job or a specific set of tasks over and over and over again. It's basically you write a prompt in advance that's a really good prompt, and then you say, okay, from now on, you just do this prompt or these three prompts over and over and over again for anyone that uses you. That's like a robot. It's like a physical robot you teach who has like a mechanical arm, and you say, you take things from here and you move them over here. It can be one of three things, and your claw expands or it contracts, right? It's the same thing, only you're breaking things down into tasks. Okay, so think that forward. So now you have thousands and hundreds of thousands of tasks being done by tens and hundreds of thousands of employees all over the world. Who's going to parse out what tasks get done with agents and what tasks stay with employees and which tasks are done with employees who now get augmented with some kind of technology? Could be agents, could be something else. Breaking things down like that is not something that the C-suite has been involved in for a long time. The world speaks in jobs, job titles, roles. That's a big set of things. It's a set of skills, it's a set of tasks, it's a set of responsibilities, it's a set of, it's many things go into a job or a role. That's the unit of discussion that companies have used forever. Well, when you go, so that's like saying soup. And you're like, yeah, I know everyone needs soup. And you're going to get this kind of soup. But what's in the soup? Now you have to figure out how to pull the onions out of, you know, split pea soup. That's not that easy because they're all blended up in there, right? You have to say, well, actually, now the onions are going to happen over here, and the rest of the soup is going to happen over here. Dissecting work like that is incredibly difficult because it's been a long time since people really understood how people are doing the work. But that's the question of the day is it's not what are the jobs of the future. It's not. It's how is the work of tomorrow going to get done? And first you have to say, what is the work of tomorrow? And then you have to say, how does that get done today, if it does at all? And how is it going to get done tomorrow? Which means you have to operate at the architecture of work level.
Oh, wow. So would you say that as you look at if you look at CEOs, you look at board members, do you think this is a blind spot of theirs? They just they don't know this yet, and so they're
Um, I think they know it. I think they know it. The ones I talk to, the CEOs and the CFOs that I talk to, and to some degree the CIOs who are also on the hook for a lot of this transformation they do know it. But it is such a colossal, amorphous,
huge.
hard to pin down
Yeah.
challenge. It's not the same as retooling a plant when you want to move from producing regular, combustion engine cars to EVs. Like, we in the industrial age and in the production age got really good at figuring out what the factory needs to look like and how to redesign the factory, right? But we haven't had to fundamentally redesign how work gets done in like writ large, not just in like this little spot over here, this little spot over there. We haven't had to re-engineer work since the birth of the knowledge economy. It sort of just
Sure.
happens here and there. It's sort of self-fulfilling, in engineering, a new technology or a new language comes out, and engineers start to fiddle around with it and use it, and they decide on their own. They're going to use this tool instead of that tool. Or they're going to start to restructure how they build, SaaS platforms or whatever it is. That happens in a pod. Now we're talking about having to rethink how work gets done across an entire company in every single role and every single place. And that is not something that the world has ever done. And
So,
so it's terrifying.
do you think there's avoidance of it right now,
I
or they're
think
just
there's
not
I think there's
there?
some really serious thought about how are we going to get from where we are today to where we need to be. I mean, the World Economic Forum comes out with a study every January, and I frankly can't wait until this January's, report. But last January, they basically said, you know, 2/3 of all companies say they're going to have to completely rethink their business model in the next 5 years. Business model, not just like same business model, same rinse and repeat. We're just going to do a little AI augmentation. That means you might change the way you sell stuff. You might change the way you build stuff. You might change your pricing model. It can mean a lot of things. Might mean you don't do your own manufacturing anymore. You're going to do it this way. I have no idea, but companies are changing their business models, not just their their skills. And then you have things like AI. And I was just reading an article last night about how OpenAI just had a code red like last week because suddenly they were ahead and they were the ones out there
Right.
pushing AI. And then Google said,
Google.
uh-oh, we need to get going. And Google stepped on the gas. And now Google's starting to overtake them. And AI was thinking about, OpenAI was thinking about their long-term strategy of of general AI, which is really doing everything humans can do better, which is a very broad remit, to now saying, actually, I think we need to come back and focus for, and this is how fast this is, for a
I
few
see.
weeks so that we can get back on track to staying ahead of Google and Anthropic and things like that. So those technologies are actually moving so lightning fast that the expectations about companies being able to adopt them and actually drive real value at them are out of them are moving really fast too. And companies just don't move that fast. So the technology is now going a million miles an hour. Expectations are going 100,000 miles an hour, and companies are only able to move 30 miles an hour
Yeah.
because what you have is a lot of people who are used to doing the same things every day. They know their jobs, they know how to get it done. You're talking about throwing all the cards up in the air and having them land somewhere else and not disrupting like your next quarter's you know, uh, results. That is very impossible. So you've got to find a roadmap to it. You've got to find a plan to get to where you need to get to over the next year, 2 years, 3 years. It's not going to be something that's done suddenly.
Does the data and the tools that you all have, does it help organizations do that?
It
Are you
does. In
there at
fact,
that
it's the
point?
only set of tools that help organizations do that. In fact, one of the things we hear all the time is, can you just tell me what we have? Which seems like a simple question. Like you have HRIS systems and you have, your performance management systems. Theoretically, you would say, well, don't you already know what you have in terms of your own employee base? And the answer is not really, because that's not how those things have worked. And so can you at least tell me what we have? And then I can start from there. And then can you tell me what everyone else has? Like, are we ahead, behind? Are we way behind? In what area and all that? And what of what we have is is about to walk out the door because there's opportunities flying up all over the place. And so the only way you can do this work successfully is by using data. It's too complicated to guess.
Too much information.
And you can't
Yeah.
do this based on headcount. Engineering, has 7,408 employees in engineering. CIO, you need to make that into 5,000. Okay, but which 5,000? Which 5,000? And what are they going to be doing? And what are we going to stop doing so that we can downsize like that? So it's very complicated. You can't do this with spreadsheets and you can't do this with PowerPoints. And frankly, the traditional way of doing this is to hire a big consulting firm to come in and help you figure out how to re-engineer a part of the company so that it, is more future ready. And it takes many millions of dollars and a long time. And once you do that, the engagement's over, you've done your changes. And guess what? While all
It's
that
already
was
changed.
happening, the world has changed
It's already
yet
changed.
again
Yeah.
15 times since you started that. And so you can't keep up. You need a data rich, dynamic environment so that when something happens, like in April of this year, everybody had their 2025 business plans in place and financial plans in place. But April came and it was what did we call it? Liberation Day? I don't know. I don't know where that name came from. But all of a sudden, all these tariffs dropped all over the world that made everybody's 2025 plan irrelevant in some way, shape, or form. And you had to react quickly. So what are you going to do? Start your planning exercise all over and get something in August or September that says, okay, here's what we're going to do now. And by that time, the tariffs had gone up and down and up and down multiple times. What you need is a dynamic environment that has all of your plans in there, all of your information in there, and then all of the market dynamics in there and says, okay, this just happened. Let's put that in as a new business driver. What happens now? And be able to recalibrate your plan very, very quickly and dynamically because the world is not going to stop and wait for you to
Yeah.
do another tabletop exercise. It's just
Yeah.
not.
So, what conversation do you wish every board member, every C suite would start having now before all this disruption exposes the gap?
Well, first, I think the disruption has already exposed the gap. I think I think we're 2 years in to making promises that we have yet to understand how we're going to keep. And we've had a year, almost a year of tumult. I'll call it geopolitical tumult that has, I think, given CEOs of public companies both a different set of challenges, but also a reason to say it's unclear and have that be a kind of a credible answer. I mean, there are even a lot of, publicly traded companies that deferred to put guidance out because they're like, I don't know, there's a lot of things changing and we're not the ones changing them. So we don't know. I'm not sure that goes that well from their shareholders' perspectives, but there's a lot of things going on in the world that are not the evolution of how work gets done that are related that you can sort of, you know, claim a mulligan for a quarter or two and say, like, we'll let you know how this all shakes out once the Fed settles on what they're doing with interest rates and once we figure out where we're going to fully actually land in tariffs and blah, blah, blah. And also once I do whatever I need to do to maneuver around those things, I'll let you know. But this changing the way work gets done because technology is moving into an unprecedented era of capability that is not well understood and also is changing like week by week, that is a bigger fish to fry, and that's going to take time. And I think I wish that CEOs and CFOs and COOs and CIOs were asking more about who can help us with this rather than turning to their CHROs and saying just make it happen because it's not going to happen that way. It's not.
And
This is something companies have not had to do for a really
yeah.
long time.
And the decision and the impact is so much greater than just a piece of software. I mean, it's the impact on their financials, their equity, their value, their livelihood. And I think what I'm seeing now is the risk of an organization being able to adapt quick enough from a
Mhm.
strategic perspective, but also from the leadership. And so leadership I split in two different areas, right? Leadership in multiple areas, right? One
Mhm.
is I got to make strategic decision. The other is my biggest cost is my people. How do I get them on board? How do I get them to follow along? And I think that's the
Yeah.
challenge that people have now is we got to do both effectively because change is inevitable in both areas.
And this isn't the same as, I mean, I am old enough to have been around for a few different, sea changes technologically. This isn't the same as what happened during the dot-com revolution. The dot-com revolutions took a lot of companies by surprise in some ways. Like a lot of brick and mortar companies really had trouble figuring out what their play was. And I say that because I worked for one of them at the time, and they were a tried and true market leading brick and mortar company. And the dot-com era came in and threatened to disrupt a whole bunch of what they had done. And they're like, what are we going to do? And, the DNA of the business is just not, it, it just doesn't fit. Like you have a hardware business with engineers behind the scene who now have to become a dot-com business. Those are not the same engineers, but you start up a little dot-com version. You say, oh, we're going to start to build out our e-commerce capabilities. We're going to go there. We're going to show the world that we're dot-comming ourselves and all that. But still, how companies did business online and how they delivered software and how they delivered technology and how they did buying and selling and all of those things changed. It just actually took longer than than what's happening now with the advent of AI. And what's happening is executives like me or anyone who's been around and run companies for a long time, they have a lot of playbooks for how you do a turnaround or a transformation. Really good CEOs have playbooks. None of those playbooks are going to work because none of them work fast enough. And so I think the CEOs of the world need to embrace a different way of thinking, which is break things and reinvent quickly. And that's just not how big companies operate.
And
It
they
just can't.
many
There's
Yeah,
too much.
many don't have that experience, right? If
No,
they're a
and
young
so
startup, they might, but the
they
majority don't.
don't. And the playbooks
Yeah,
of the last 30 years don't work right now.
yeah.
So what's
The
been
scary
happening?
thought.
So during the dot-com boom, everybody started to say, like, and now everybody's got browsers in their, I mean, this is going back a while. Everybody's got browsers and Internet Explorer and Netscape and whatever it was at the time. And they're now starting to learn about, like, oh, we need a website or we need a web page. That's how it started. And like, oh, let's do a
Right.
web page. And then we need e-commerce. Okay, great, great. And that's fine. And there were a lot of dot-coms that failed, which is the whole crash, because everybody got so caught up in the hype. They were willing to buy into these dot-com companies whose business models never made any sense, but nobody was asking those questions anymore. They were like, I don't care. Same thing in some ways is happening with AI. The frenzy of investment into AI first startups is a little bit insane. But the VCs of the world in Silicon Valley got really burned, it, because of the frothy markets in the last, few years, and then how lots of things are underwater. Plus, money's not free anymore. So it's not quite the same as during the dot-com era or during like 2021 frenzy or, 2019 when there was a SPAC frenzy where they were going with IPOs that didn't even have companies in them yet, which is crazy. There is a lot more serious look at is the business model sensible? Not just, ooh, it says AI, so we're buying it. The issue is the business models do make sense because the business models are saying this whole old way of doing things, we can completely take over and and completely put this entire swath of the market out of business. And they're at least to some degree gonna do it. And what's happening in big companies now is they're doing things like giving people licenses to ChatGPT. That's a toe in the water kind of a thing. And I'm like, well, okay. And in many cases, they're starting to spin up um, groups of people who are starting to mess around with LLMs and building agents and stuff there, which I applaud that too. But I would consider it when you look across all of the employers, not the leading ones, but all of them. At best, writ large, they're dabbling. And they're also trying to understand, like, how do you actually get value out of this technology? So I read a LinkedIn post. So I didn't read the article, but apparently the article was from Reuters, and I probably should look it up. But it was about IBM, who had in 2023 said they were gonna save something like $8.5 billion by reducing workforce and using AI. So 2023 is pretty forward thinking for that. I mean, it's when AI, open AI, started to get kind of mainstream. But
Right.
they put a stake in the ground then, and they said, we're gonna, it's gonna replace human work, and so we're gonna save the money by offboarding employees. Fast forward 2 years. They actually found tremendous efficiencies, billions of dollars of efficiencies, but their headcount didn't go down. And they found efficiencies other ways, but their headcount is the same. It's just that the roles they have are very different. So they got rid of a lot of roles, but they had to bring in a lot of new roles to wrangle this new technology properly, to use these new tools with knowledge and imagination and the ability to execute in a way that was different than the methods of yesterday. So it wasn't a headcount savings, because actually it was a it was a shift in headcount in order to get that. It was a speeding up of things, which is as important. And so now when I hear CEOs and talk about how AI is going to impact their business, they're not really talking about getting rid of headcount, net headcount. They're not. They're talking about it changing the speed of their ability to innovate and stay ahead. That's kind of a fun multiplier versus like a way to reduce headcount.
And not as depressing.
No, but I mean, if it means you're going to speed up and you're going to be able to innovate way better, that
That's
is
huge.
amazing and very
Yeah.
exciting. But you're going to have to do a massive talent transformation to be able to achieve that, because you can't take your old talent without even upskilling them just the way what they know now and all of a sudden magically have that happen. And that's where we are living right now. And I think the problem I have, which is that Talent Neuron's a small company and we're unique in our ability to help with this way. And the CEOs, CFOs, CIOs don't know us because we lived in the HR, talent acquisition, people analytics world for so many years, and we're also part of Gartner for 7 years. So they just don't know that there's a better way out there. They don't know. And so that's why I said I have to get out there and start to tell the story to people outside of HR. There is a better way. And you need to like hear it, because you're not getting it done any other way.
Yeah. I want to shift gears a little bit just in the time we have and focus a little bit on you and your organization. And to follow up on the point you just made, if your own team could instantly, let's say, master one idea about speaking with CEOs and CFOs, what idea would change the game the fastest?
So so a long time ago, like before I ever started to run the businesses, but I was like the head of product, or the head, I was a chief product officer, I was chief strategy officer for a long time. I was the head of like large functions, right, for a long time in my big corporate career. And it was interesting how much my lens had to change as I decided I want to become a GM and a CEO. And I was actually presenting something about how we were transforming the business in this software business that I was chief product and strategy officer for, and I was presenting to the CEO, and he said to me, I did this like 40-page deck, and I was very proud of how much transformation we had gone under and all that. I was talking about how we moved the methods and the approach to product development and blah blah blah. And at the end, well, actually, he didn't. I don't get to the end, but at the end, he said, "Okay, but who gives a shit?" And and I was like, "What?" And I think when we laughed about it, but when we talked about it, he goes, "Look, at the end of the day, all I'm thinking about is how I'm going to deliver my top line numbers and how I'm going to continue to improve margins on time and beat it if I can while staying competitive. And if everything you're doing and everything you're saying isn't showing me directly how it helps me do that, I don't care." Meaning, I assume you're doing all that stuff around best practices and good process and good governance and all that. But at the end of the day, I don't care. All I care about is that, is it going to give me new customers? Is it going to bring us more revenue? Is it going to help us pull away from our competitors? Or is it going to improve our margins? And God, if it could do all of those at once, then you have my attention. So when I talk to my folks about who are going to go and talk to multiple stakeholders, I'm like, you got to remember there's quite a few of who cares people in the audience. You've got to talk directly to delivering on earnings, delivering on efficiencies, and delivering on top line growth. Because otherwise you're expecting them to connect the dots and they don't have time to do that. They're under so much pressure to deliver on the things they committed to on time that you got to draw the line directly to them. And a lot of HR buyers and a lot of HR people don't speak business that way. So translating is really important. That's why
So
I'm kind of
huge.
out there more.
Love that. I love that. Um, Talk about leadership for a moment as we move to the end here. What is the leadership behavior? So the podcast is inside the leader's mind.
Yeah.
What's in the way becomes the way. And so I always like to ask the question, what's a leadership behavior you maybe once felt you had to hide, and now it feels like a core strength of yours?
Well, I mean, I perhaps have a different perspective on this because I'm a woman, in case you didn't notice. But I will say, like many women who rise up through the ranks, executive ranks, etc., especially in male-dominated industries like technology and financial services, and where I built my career, um, there is a lot of, especially when you're in that VP, SVP, EVP level, there's a lot of wondering, like, what's going to get me beyond this level. Like, a lot of executives sit at that VP or EVP level, and that's as far as they go. And they're like, how do I get beyond that? And when you look around, almost all, not all, but almost all of the examples that you could emulate are men. And men do a good job of emulating successful men, and then they become successful men, and that's the way it goes. But women don't emulate successful men very successfully, and that's because it's an ill-fitting suit for us. Um, and I had to learn over time and experience and trying things that my gravitas and my power and my ability to get people to follow me actually comes from a very different place than a traditional male s- power center of gravity, all the way back to like caveman times. Men's power, the alpha male, came from physical strength and the ability they were louder, they were bigger, they were stronger, their ability to go out and like slay the beast and bring home the meat, right? Women's power, even back then, came from, nurturing and growing and creating a family unit so that people reproduced and stuff like that. And so there's this reality in us as human beings about the fact that I think what I've learned over time and levers I use all the time now, especially during times of great change and transformation where people are nervous, is that my ability to get people to follow me comes from warmth. It comes from the same place that your mom's power comes from. Most households, the mom is the center of gravity in many, many ways. Who do you go to when everything goes wrong? Or who are you afraid of disappointing? Or whatever it is. That's not always true, but it's very dominantly true. And so women can be incredibly strong leaders and strong decision makers and visionaries, but they have to actually add that warmth focus and that connectivity focus that helps people go, she understands me, she cares about me, and she's not gonna do anything to hurt me. So I'm coming with her. Whereas y y the male equivalent doesn't need the same thing. Sometimes they just need to latch onto a vision and like, he must know what he's doing because he's very, very bold about it, or they might be afraid of him, right? But it's still an alpha male thing. And I've learned to tap into my humanness and into my warmth to get people to come to scary places with me and stay there with me. And I think that has been probably my secret to building high performing companies.
Love it. All right, two quick follow-up last questions. If you could put a single sentence in front of every CEO and CFO that maybe they put in a slide deck before their next earnings call, what would that sentence say?
Oh, they would. Well, I wouldn't put it in their slide deck, but I
Or
would
in a
put it on their
presentation or so,
desk. I would
in a
say,
conversation. Yeah, yeah.
your next workforce crisis is already on your balance sheet, and you don't know where it is. We do.
All
That's what
right.
I would say. They're not gonna say that
Last,
to their shareholders, but it's true.
no, but you want them to be thinking. That's really what it is. You want them to be thinking it. That's
Yeah.
what it's about. All right. Last question as we wrap up here. What is a question you wish people would ask you, but they don't because they don't know to ask you? Something that is not asked very often, rarely ever asked, but you kind of wish people would. Could be about anything. Doesn't have to be about work, doesn't have to be about this product, talent neuronic.
Yeah.
Just what's a question you wish
Well,
people
you
had
know what?
asked you?
I mean, I would say, I wish people would ask me more often how I got to where I am, professionally, personally, and all that, because I've had a very, curvy journey. And I think when I do tell people that, sometimes I volunteer it, but sometimes I'm, speaking in a forum where that's the topic, and people feel very, encouraged about how far they can take their capabilities and their success and their accomplishments, uh, even when they feel stuck where they are. And I people don't ask it very often. They make big assumptions because, I've run 6 companies and I'm a CEO. They make assumptions about how that all happened. I'm like, and they're almost all entirely wrong every time.
What
And so
is the
people are like,
assumption? What
the
is the
assumption
assumption
is,
and what is the root cause? What is the
yeah, the
secret?
assumption is I was really smart. I got great grades in school. I went to college. I graduated summa cum laude. Then I went to business school, graduate summa cum laude. Then I became a high-powered executive and off to the races. And that's not at all what happened. I mean, eventually I did graduate summa cum laude in both of those things, but not until much later. And it was much harder to figure out who I was and what I had to offer the world and and how I was going to actually like execute on that, what I even wanted for myself. It was a journey where you feel lost a lot. And when I talk to young people today, or even people who are stuck in like I'm a VP of this or I'm a director of this, and they've been that for 15 years and they don't know how to break through it. Um, they they don't understand how they might have all of the capabilities in themselves that I have. They're just not seeing the pathway, and or that there is one. They're just making presumptions about, "This is as far as I go, Peter principle." And like there is a Peter principle, I get it, but I'm just saying like people could go a lot further and do a lot more things if they had belief that it was possible.
You say
And
that
people,
is
yeah,
that your secret sauce? Is that the keystone or the root cause that has enabled you to continue
it
to
is
navigate?
embracing all of those experiences I have that felt like being in the ditch or felt like failures or felt like being lost, and turning that into resilience and grit and
Yeah.
and smarts and having to get jobs that I wasn't qualified for because I hadn't graduated yet or whatever. It's resourcefulness, willing to learn, fast learning, working hard, grit, resilience, being able to take no and not take it personally. All of that happened along the way. Those characteristics, when you're running a company and you're trying to transform a company, you run into a lot of crap that can be very discouraging. And I just don't get discouraged.
That's remarkable. That is remarkable. Well, that is a great place to end today. If someone wants to learn more about Talent Neuron or you or anything, what is the best way for them to reach out or learn more?
Well, you could certainly connect to me on LinkedIn. Pretty easy to find, Julie Peck and Talent Neuron CEO. Or you can go to talentneuron.com and reach out to us that way. But I do hope you connect because I love talking about what's happening in the world of work, whether you're a customer of ours or not. I love talking about it, and I love talking about what we're seeing and how things are weirdly changing faster than anyone knows because we can actually see it in the data before it shows up in the Wall Street Journal.
So cool. That is
Yeah.
so cool. Well, Julie, thank you so much for being with me today. It was a fabulous conversation. I really appreciate you being here.
Yeah. Thanks, David. Thanks for the time. I appreciate the questions.
Absolutely. So, folks, this is Inside the Leader's Mind. I'm David Susan. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, share, and join us on our next edition. Thanks, folks.
Thanks so
Bye.
much. Bye, David.